So Florida has a reputation for having some fairly unique problems, and I've just learned of a new one. I actually do not know much about this, and so I'm very excited that we have an expert coming on to talk about the toxic algae problem in Florida. We're joined now by Congressional candidate Tim Canova. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you here to talk about both this and also the fact that you are running against Debbie Wasserman Schultz, which makes it automatically a campaign that we're very interested in. I'm sure a lot of people around the country are going to want to see the results of. So first off, I want to talk about this toxic algae problem. For people watching the show that might not be familiar with this, maybe they don't live in an area that experiences this, what is this so-called red tide?
Well, there are two problems. One is a red tide, which is a saltwater algae problem naturally occurring. And the other is what's called the blue-green toxic algae, which is the cyanobacteria, which comes from freshwater sources. Both of these are naturally occurring, but not to the extent that we see. It's become really quite catastrophic, and much of it is from agricultural runoff. We have factory farms. We also have big sugar farms right around Lake Okeechobee, which is the second largest lake within a state in this country. Lake Okeechobee should be, well, I should say for eons and eons, it drained naturally into the Everglades and would recharge the aquifer of South Florida. But for the past few decades, it's been diverted into the Caloosahatchee River that goes to the Gulf of Mexico, where Fort Myers is, and into the St. Lucie River, which goes eastward to the Atlantic coast where Stewart is. And the blue-green algae buildup has been tremendous. In the past 3 weeks, it's killed more than 400 sea turtles, almost 100 manatees, thousands of fish and birds, pelicans, sea otters, you name it. I was in Fort Myers a few days ago to inspect the damage, and the odor is still tremendous. It's still nauseating. We had to wear face masks, and it's certainly correlated with problems with human health. People are getting sick just from ingesting, I should say, breathing the air where the toxic algae has formed. This is a problem that's been going on in Florida for many years, and part of the problem is that the big sugar farms south of Lake Okeechobee don't want to sell their land to convert it to marshland. And voters in Florida a few years ago voted in a referendum. 76% of Florida voters approved that referendum to have the state buy out the sugar farms. The problem is a political problem. Big sugar and big agricultural interests have spent an awful lot of money in purchasing influence with both the Democratic and Republican parties in Florida. According to one study, over the course of the last quarter century, the big sugar firms have spent more than $50 million on both parties.
And so one of the people who's getting some of that money is relevant to your race in particular. So recently you've tied your opponent, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, to this issue. What is her connection to that?
Well, we really tied her to this issue 2 years ago when I was challenging her in a Democratic primary. Wasserman Schultz has taken an awful lot of money from Big Sugar, and I think she's also probably helped them spread it around the country to candidates all over the country. But in the state of Florida, she's been a long time beneficiary of these campaign contributions from Big Sugar. And she hasn't done much to try to find a solution. A couple of years ago, it was a Republican congressman who introduced legislation to have the Interior Department exercise the power of eminent domain to essentially take these sugar farms south of the lake and to convert them into marshland. And Wasserman Schultz certainly did not co-sponsor that legislation. Instead, she's voted for all of these agricultural subsidies. The big sugar companies are getting over $100 million a year in federal subsidies, which might be one of the reasons they don't want to give up their land and sell their land for an environmental solution.
Yeah. Well, this is really interesting because, of course, here at TYT, we talk constantly about the effect that these donations have on a number of different issues. And they tend to be high-profile things, issues having to do with the pharmaceutical, energy, banking sectors, things like that. But the idea that something as specific as an exacerbation of an environmental issue like this toxic algae, I don't think that that's on most people's radar. And I know you've talked often about how you're financing your campaign. As you've been going about this campaign, is that a topic, the area of finance and the way it affects all these issues? Is that something that people are really showing an interest in?
Yes, certainly, no doubt about it. I think most people are really disgusted about the extent of corporate influence and corporate donations in our politics. So we've been raising money online. People have been going to timcanova.com and making small donations. The average size of our donation is only $20, whereas Wasserman Schultz's average donation is over $500. So, of course, for those who are doing very well in our society, the top 1%, let's say, these are the best of times, and Wasserman Schultz has had no trouble raising money from big corporate PACs and corporate interests. Whereas these are tough times for folks who can barely spare $20 for a campaign.
Yeah. Now, I wanted to ask you one other issue. Earlier this year, you were actually involved in a court case, again, involving Debbie Wasserman Schultz. And obviously, many people are worried about election security, and this appeared to have an aspect of that. So what was that case about?
Well, thanks for asking. When our race ended in 2016, our internal field numbers predicted a far different result. And our internal field numbers were based on knocking on 10 to 12,000 doors a week. So it was a very large sample size. And a number of other election integrity groups started to contact me and to express their concerns that the official results were way off. So what we did was put in a public records request to inspect the ballots. And the supervisor of elections of Broward County stonewalled us for over half a year, forced me to file a lawsuit in the summer of 2017, just to inspect the ballots to verify the vote. While the lawsuit was pending, and just a few days after serving them with discovery requests to inspect the ballots, the supervisor of elections destroyed all of the ballots that were cast in our race. And these are multiple violations of criminal statutes under state and federal law. And of course, destruction of evidence in an ongoing lawsuit. So it's really outrageous. It does beg the question, why would local election officials commit felonies to cover what up exactly? We wanted to inspect as well the software that was used for the electronic voting machines, and we were told time and again that we're not allowed to inspect the software. It's proprietary. It's the private property and trade secrets of the software vendors that are hired by the supervisor of elections, who happens to be a close ally of Debbie Wasserman Schultz. So, you know, the toxic green algae is not the only thing that stinks in Florida right now.
That's a nice way of rounding out the conversation there. So I want to thank you, Tim Canova, for joining us, talking about both these issues, and good luck in your race against Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you so much for watching this video from The Damage Report. Please don't forget to like the video and also to subscribe to the channel so that you get notified as soon as new videos become available. To hear even more about both this topic and other issues not being covered nearly enough by the mainstream media, you're going to want to tune in every morning to our full hour-long show. That's at 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, available on the TYT Network channel on YouTube TV.